Welcome everybody. We're excited to have you joining us for the Rural Life Virtual Summer Institute. Welcome to this leadership edition of Increasing Student Ownership in the Classroom, Putting Students Center Stage. My name is Christy Snyder and I'm your session host. I'm here to support the session presenter, who I will introduce shortly. Offer technical assistance, and as well as share the session evaluation and certificate information at the end of the session. Please don't hesitate to use the chat to ask questions or to request technical support. And at this time, I'd like to introduce you to your session presenter, Bethany Fillers.
Good morning. Hey, well, I am excited to be here with you and want to echo Christy's welcome. And, we're going to spend the next, 55 minutes or so exploring the concept of student ownership, and really specifically how we can foster increased levels of student ownership in the classroom. And I also want to add that the ideas and the strategies that we're going to explore today can be applied to both traditional classroom settings as well as digital learning spaces. Alrighty, with that first, let's chat about materials. Good news, everything you are going to need for this session, you will be provided with. So it'll either be on the session slide, or Christy will drop links in the chat box, which I'll showcase in just a moment. And at one point, there's even a QR code if you want to access materials that way. And then lastly, toward the end of the session, I'll share a resources page that's interactive, and talk you through a couple additional resources that'll be available on our Virtual Summer Institute website in the folder for this session. All right, so this learning space that we're going to be in for the next 50 minutes or so, please know that everyone is welcome. I want you to feel comfortable participating in this learning space. I know it can be awkward, right? We're on Zoom, but we can be awkward together. I know it's not like being in person, but still this space, it's a space for you. I want you to share your voice. There's going to be many opportunities for discussion. So I'm hoping that we'll dig in together. And as this is a leadership session, there'll be some time and space for us to explore what this concept looks like as we support that work as a leader. And so I want us to talk about that. And leaders, hopefully you're a little more comfortable, maybe even than our teacher friends, in sharing your voices. All right, and hopefully we'll also have a little bit of fun. Why not? So our session objectives. First, we'll examine how two critical types of student ownership work together to really ensure that students are responsible for doing the thinking in the classroom. And then also, we're going to spend the majority of the session exploring and actually seeing what increased levels of student ownership look like and sound like in middle school classrooms with real students. So that's exciting. And then also want to lead the session, want you to lead the session with various resources to support increased student ownership in the classroom. Alrighty, but let's first talk just a moment about Zoom. I know many of us are probably getting pretty familiar with Zoom, but a couple thoughts. Your toolbar at the bottom is where you can mute and unmute. And again, I want us to share our voices, so feel free to unmute at that time and share. Also would love to see your faces if you feel comfortable, so you can click that video, start and stop video button. You see there in the middle the chat bubble, and so if you click that, it'll open up your chat box window. And like I said, I want us to feel free to share all sorts of ideas and thoughts with each other in the chat, and that's where Christy will drop resources for us throughout the session. All right, so let's jump on in. And as Christy said, my name is Bethany Fillers. I'm the Director of Professional Learning at Rural Life. Prior to this role, I was a coach for some schools in our first cohort at Rural Life. And so I love this work and I'm excited to continue the work with our second round of schools. Other roles that I've held, I was a middle school teacher, mostly taught ELA, a little bit of math. Let's see, gosh, this will be my 17th year in education. After I served as a teacher for about 6 years, I was a freshman academy principal for 4 years and loved all 650 of my freshmen. And then for about 6 years after that, I served at the Department of Education as a literacy consultant, and then also as the director of an improvement community focused on early literacy. But blah, blah. Okay, enough about me. I want to know more about you. So in the chat, so here's our first chat moment. I want you to share your first name, your role, and since this is a leadership session, I know we still may end up with all sorts of leadership roles, from principals to instructional coaches to teacher leaders. But share your role, your school, and then we're going to jump on into thinking about student ownership. So what 1 to 3 words do you associate with the concept of student ownership? So lots to put in the chat. Name, role, school, and 1 to 3 words you associate with the concept of student ownership. Thank you, Lori. Fellow ELA teacher. Yes, student-led learning. Love that. Denise is a principal. Ooh, she mentions engage, student becoming the teacher. That's okay, Laura. We know what you meant. All right, Tim. Ooh, a history teacher. All right, Tim, don't forget to add your thoughts about student ownership, 1 to 3 words. Neil, 7th grade science. Yay, we've got a history example and a science example we're going to look at. And Neil mentions accountability. Yes, what are we going to see regarding accountability as tied to student ownership? Shauna, ooh, a literacy coach. Self-directed learning, reflection on learning. Melody, special education at Gray. Ooh, engagement. See that sentiment echoed. Pamela, ooh, yes, lead librarian. Student ownership is choice, buy-in, engagement. Tim adds student accountability. Haley at Grandview, 6th grade ELA, engaging, student-led. John, 5th and 7th, ooh, yeah, science, social studies, creates motivated students. Ooh, I love that, got a phrase going. Let's see, oh, we've got math, Christy from math. We've got a math example too, Christy. Making own rules for stations. Yes, that is an example of student ownership. Thank you. And Linda, one of our amazing instructional coaches, talks about responsibility. Yes, engagement, right? All of that tied to ownership. Christy, did I miss any as you were scrolling through there?
No, you did an excellent job. It looks like you've got, teachers and instructional coaches and administrators here. So a wide range of people.
Good. That means when everybody's sharing out in just a little bit, wink, wink, right? We'll have some good representation from across all those roles. All right, let's see. Let me get myself organized here. Okay, so ownership of learning. Throughout this session, we're going to have little subsections, right? And so this first one, I want us to first explore, what are we asking students to own? There you see in quotes. We know that, our students deserve enriching opportunities to stretch their thinking, expand their content knowledge, right? Build and refine skills, and ultimately maximize their talents. And I want us to think here about, we know that what students learn in school is directly tied to what they're asked to do in school. I think few of us would disagree with that, right? So it's really that work, that what we're asking them to do in school, that places them in this position for ownership. And with that, we're going to explore some trends, both national and Tennessee trends, to kick us off this morning. All right, but first, let's all kind of build a shared understanding of how we define student ownership. And many of you may be familiar, with some of this language. Student ownership is students doing as much of the cognitive work of the lesson as possible, right? It's the thinking, the reading, analyzing, synthesizing, all of that work, right? Cognitive lift, you might have heard it referenced, and that those students are doing that for as much of the lesson as possible. And we know that ownership is directly connected to opportunity. And we know that making sure that students do doing most of the work in the classroom requires teachers to hone a specific set of practices that really put forth opportunities for students to do that. And we're going to explore that today. So student ownership then is also directly dependent on both lesson content as well as teacher expectations for engagement. And we can think about ownership as operating on a continuum. And there's nothing fancy, schmancy about this continuum, but I want us to go back to that statement that I think few of us would disagree with, right? The idea that what students learn in school is directly tied to what they're asked to do in school. And so we want to ensure that every day we're offering as many opportunities for students to dig into some challenging content and to engage students in multiple ways that really put them center stage in the learning process. So let's think about some national trends. So TNTP, which is an organization, used to be known as the New Teacher Project when they started off back in the 90s, started by teachers for teachers, but they've grown into a national organization, and they're nationally recognized study, right? Multi-year study across all different types of school settings, urban, suburban, rural, all sorts of socioeconomic background, demographics, all included. They found that, good news for the most part was that students succeeded on 71% of assignments given. Okay, so about 75% of the time there, they were being successful on their assignments. But they also found, right, that students were only demonstrating success against grade level standards 17% of the time, because the assignments that they were given rarely gave them an opportunity to do so. And really this one gets you in the gut. Again, this was a multi-year study. Students spent more than 500 hours per school year in this study on assignments that weren't appropriate for their grade level, right? With instruction that just wasn't asking enough of them, which was an equivalent of 6 months of wasted class time, keep reading, in each core subject. So this study explored more than just ELA classrooms, right? It was across the board. And we were seeing just hours and hours of wasted class time on assignments that just weren't in line with grade level expectations. So in a similar study from the Education Trust, here we found that fewer than 4 in 10 assignments were aligned with grade appropriate standards. And with that, only 4% of all assignments, 4%, not a typo, push student thinking to higher levels. And they saw that about 85% of all assignments asked students to either just recall information or apply basic skills and concepts versus kind of pushing thinking to the upper ends of maybe some models that you're familiar with, such as Bloom's taxonomy or Webb's depth of knowledge, right? We know that we need all different types of knowledge, and we know we have to start at that basic level, but I want us to think about how we move the instruction to ask more of students. All right, and then a note about Tennessee. So Tennessee did a similar study, and what was pretty interesting about that is that our data mirrored the data from both of these studies. So both from the TNTP nationwide study as well as the Education Trust, our data from across the state. So we took samples from across the 8 core regions of the state of Tennessee, and our data mirrored it really closely. So with that, right, second opportunity really to get in the chat here. As an educational leader, whether you're a teacher, right, an administrator, an instructional coach, what's resonating with you the most about these national trends or our state trends that I mentioned there at the end? So you can share in the chat or feel free to share, unmute yourself and share with the group. What's resonating?
Denise says few are grade level appropriate.
Yeah, lots of assignments. Woo, a whole bunch of assignments just weren't grade appropriate. Oh, Tim, did you hit enter too soon? I do that all the time. Again, if it's easier just to talk versus type, that's all right. Ooh, Melody says significant misalignment between what works and what students are doing. Yes.
Also have wasted time, lack of critical thinking. Students need to be challenged more in higher level thinking. Dismal.
Oh, you and I said it together, Chrissy. Dismal, yeah. We need to consistently challenge students to reach and stretch rather than just doing. I like that, rather than just doing. Yes, the research found, I'll give you a couple more moments to add in the chat, but the research especially found in both studies that, kids are pretty compliant, right? As we looked across the nation, I think sometimes we tend to think, oh man, there's these classrooms where it's just wild and you can't get anything done. And we know, unfortunately, that there may be some examples of that. But for the most part, kids did what they were asked to do. They came in and they did their work. But then when we start to think about what is that work that we're putting in front of them, we started to surface those trends. Yeah, data reflects that teachers are working hard, yes, but possibly maybe at the wrong things. Thank you, Shauna. Not effective use of class time, some wasted effort. Christy, what else are you seeing that maybe I'm missing? Because that's flooding in.
Tim is mentioning that standards, homework, time spent on wasted subjects, too much busy work. Says that we as educators have to have congruency where teachers design classroom activities that are accurately matched to clear learning goals.
Thank you, Haley. All right, well, we are going to continue to think about what we found here in this data and also how we can support increased levels of student ownership. All right, with that, I want to first stop and say that this session is designed to expand our understanding of ownership as a whole, really asking us to consider to what degree do the learning experience we provide our students offer and then support true opportunities for ownership. And my little timeout clock. Almost threw in one of those little timeout referees, but I chose the clock here instead because I do want us to pause and acknowledge the fact that we know that students have to do their part, right? We know that, a student comes in and ultimately is the one that decides whether or not to engage on any given day. But I want us to be encouraged, right, by some additional data that has come out of these studies and many, many other studies, especially around motivation, and then how that's tied to the work that's really offered students day in and day out. And that is that even in the toughest places, and by that I mean even in places where students are facing some big uphill battles, right? That even in those places, that when students are provided with authentic opportunities to learn and they are offered appropriate scaffolds and that when there are high expectations that we believe they can do it, they do, right? They can and they do excel. So I think that's really encouraging. And along those same lines, they found that, giving students these opportunities to really dig into some rich, even really difficult work, that when they are supported, that they take it, right? They run with that expectation, and it also actually builds increased motivation. So I think at times we think, well, if I push them too hard, they're just going to quit. And I mean, there is a chance that that'll happen, but with the right support, students actually run with that and they can excel. And so I think that's really encouraging to hear. All right, so we're going to continue to expand our understanding as we think about two types of ownership. So, there's really two types of ownership that we should both seek and then support in the classroom. One is around engagement, right? Who participates, how often, and to what degree. And then there's also thinking ownership, the depth and quality of thinking in which students are engaged. So first, with regard to engagement, that's who's participating, how often, to what degree. Really maximizing engagement ownership means that there's opportunities to get all students involved, right? That they're asked to get involved often versus, let's just say, at the end of a lesson. And that they're asked to do some really active thinking, right? That it's active learning versus passive learning. And we're going to, again, explore what that really looks like in some middle school classrooms in just a moment. So with regard to thinking, maximizing ownership around thinking requires learning opportunities that ask students to grapple with challenging content and then apply that learning in meaningful ways. So with these two things working in tandem, we really see that students take on the challenge and that they really can be successful. Love this matrix. And this is from, I'm not actually sure how to say, Himalaya 2011. And I love that they added that students cannot have true, meaningful student ownership of learning without both of the things that we have been exploring here. So the thinking and the engagement. Now, they refer to it as cognition and participation, but very, very similar concepts here. And I thought, we could explore just real quickly what it looks like to be in some of these quadrants. So I think we could all acknowledge that we want to spend most of our lessons here in quadrant 4, right? High cognition with high participation. That means kids are asked to do some appropriately challenging and rigorous work, and that all students are being asked to participate. They're asked to participate often, and to an appropriate degree as well. So, without rich, meaningful, and appropriately rigorous text or questions and tasks, for example, students may easily answer lesson questions, even have a lot of fun, but not necessarily learn anything of real high value. That might be quadrant 2, right? Where we've got some low cognition. If texts aren't appropriate, if questions and tasks aren't really pushing kids or asking enough of kids, we've got some low cognition here, but yet they may be participating a lot, right? So that would be quadrant 2. The flip side of that would be quadrant 3. Maybe we've got appropriately rigorous texts and questions and tasks, but our instructional decisions as an educator are only asking real ownership from a subset of students. Maybe we only call on the kids who raise their hands. Maybe we only ask kids to just think in their head, and so we don't have visible learning to really explore and see who's participating. So these are just some examples. And again, I love this matrix to help us think about where we want to be for the majority of our lessons. All right, so there are some instructional decisions that inadvertently diminish ownership. So as leaders, I think, this is not an exhaustive list, but I think it's really important one for us to examine and could serve as some look-fors as we seek to support increased student ownership across our school buildings. So one would be providing students with below grade level materials, right? We saw that in that research. And so working with our teachers and exploring our materials is certainly an appropriate place to really start to dig into this concept of ownership. All right, teachers talking or writing more in a lesson than students. And this looks like over-explaining directions, over-scaffolding, even over-modeling. We know, of course, that both scaffolding and modeling are important, but there's a real balance there. We don't want to over-model and do all the thinking for students. Using majority of low-level question stems. So back to, are we asking enough of students? If we're, again, considering support such as Bloom's taxonomy or web sets of knowledge, both of those models have question stems that a lot of teachers use. And so if we're spending the majority of the lesson in those lower level question stems, then that's a signal that we may be inadvertently diminishing ownership. Similarly, asking questions or wording questions in such a way that require only a one-word answer, right? There's not a lot to own when the answer is yes, no, or an answer that's simply just kind of a recall type response. And then lastly, rounding up answers. This one's a huge one. And this one's a really neat one to explore as a leader, as you're kind of in and out of classrooms. In essence, what we should all be centering our instruction around is that right is right? There's a right answer. And if we are planning as a teacher and really examining what would be an exemplar response, what's the response that I really want to hear from students, and how can I scaffold and support students getting to that answer versus a student kind of getting 20% of the answer and then me as a teacher kind of rounding up and filling in the blank, or providing the additional answer to the broader answer. We know that inadvertently diminishes ownership. We've got to expect students to get to that right answer versus us providing it. And again, we've got to see an example of, actually a couple examples of that in just a moment. So some instructional moves that really impact student ownership. And this is a subset of indicators off the Instructional Practice Guide for literacy from Student Achievement Partners. And it says for literacy, but here literacy means pretty much everything but math. And there actually is a similar set of indicators for math classrooms that also addresses ownership. But the gist here is, what instructional moves actually foster increased levels of student ownership in the classroom. And you'll notice all of these statements begin with the teacher, right? So it's about posing questions and tasks where students are doing the majority of the cognitive lift of the lesson. It's the teacher cultivating reasoning and meaning making and allowing that productive struggle. It's the teacher expecting evidence and precision. That's back to when we were talking about rounding up, right? Evidence, precision from students, and then knowing how to appropriately kind of prompt and probe students' answers accordingly. And then the last one noted here is really creating conditions for student conversations where students are encouraged to talk about their own and each other's thinking and really build understanding together. So as we wrap up this little subsection, two key ideas I want us to take away, right? Increased student ownership of learning is either facilitated or hindered by classroom culture and expectations. And the lesson has to actually, and I kind of plug that in there, present students with authentic opportunities for ownership of learning. We're gonna dig in and explore these key ideas through some examples in just a few moments. Okay, so what does increased student ownership look like? All right, so this next section, you'll have to just bear with my over-the-top theater analogy. I just kind of ran with it since my subtitle here was putting students center stage. So we're going to spotlight some effective practices. And for Act 1, wink, wink, we're going to actually watch 3 videos that spotlight some effective practices that I then want us to explore through a guiding reflection protocol. So as you're watching these videos, I might suggest that you just jot down your noticings. If it's helpful, you can also take a stretch break while you watch. Feel free to stand up or engage in whatever way works for you. And then we're also going to chat and hopefully have some whole group share out and reflection. And I do want to note that these 3 middle school classrooms that we're going to kind of take a peep into serve high need student populations. Okay, so I suggest that you take a picture if it's helpful of the next slide. And this here, I'm kind of calling it behind the scenes. These are those instructional moves that I just talked us through a moment ago. And so we are going to pull a couple at a time to really dig into and watch for across these videos. And so it might be helpful if you have these on hand, maybe on your phone to use as well. All right, here's the guiding question that we are going to explore. In what ways do the instructional decisions highlighted in the classroom example put students center stage in the learning process? That's the question we're going to come back to after we watch our examples. All right, here are those instructional moves again. For these first 2 videos, we're actually going to watch a 6th grade math excerpt and an 8th grade ELA excerpt. And these 2 videos actually highlight all 4 of these. That's why I picked them. And again, no lesson's perfect, and I'm not saying that there aren't things we might adjust if it were our own classrooms, but I do think that these 2 examples in particularly really highlight how the teacher expects evidence and precision from students, and then really probes and supports students' answers accordingly, and then also creates conditions for student conversations where students are encouraged to build upon each other's thinking. So keep those 2 in mind as we dig into these first 2 examples. Our videos are going to run back to back. So again, we'll watch the 6th grade math, and then we'll jump straight into the 8th grade ELA, and then we'll debrief with that guiding question. All right. There we go. Make sure there's no questions in the chat. No? All right. 6th grade math.
Take a look at the very front. We're going to do a couple things with volume, practice volume, and then practice service area. And someone give me a definition for volume to get us started. Someone from yesterday gave us a definition for volume. Mark. You're telling me how we're going to solve it. If you say length times width times height, you're giving me a calculation. What I want to know, and you probably know this too, Mark, is what volume is. What is that amount? Okay, Eureka, what were you going to say?
Volume is the amount of square cubes and the amount of cubes.
Okay, I'm going to refine what you said a little bit. The amount of cubes, what should we say? What's the real technical definition? Instead of just cubes, what were we going to say was?
The amount of cubic inches under rectangular or three-dimensional figure.
Or any sort of three-dimensional figure. I'm going to say the amount of cubic, not inches, because it's not necessarily inches, right? It could be feet, it could be centimeters, it could be yards, units, right? Cubic units. And then, as we said, that a figure takes up, that an object. And Jonathan, I know you know the other word. What's the other word for takes up?
Occupied.
Occupied.
8th grade ELA.
You should box it up if you haven't already. This describes Aunt Alexandra. Thoughts? Mel?
I agree with Dione that Aunt Alexandra is like preoccupied with heredity because she's like, her family, the family's past like, what's his name? Simon. Well, the dad, like, he was really rich. So back then, she's like.
He owned a what?
He owned a farm.
Not just any kind of farm.
Boys French Landings.
Which was a?
I forgot.
Monique?
It was a birch.
Nope. Diane?
Plantation.
It was, which means he had.
He had a lot of money.
And? Kiara?
Slaves.
Correct. He had what?
Slaves.
Continue your thought.
I think that she's like trying to look back on that and like she's still like preoccupied on it. So she's like trying to act like she's still trying to act like that while the other family is not.
Act like what?
Like act rich. That's how I don't know.
Tell me more. You're right. Continue.
She's like trying to act rich because like when wasn't she wearing like the way she was like wearing things, like she's trying to present herself like she's like superior to like the rest of the family.
Thoughts?
Alrighty, so in those two examples, what were some instructional decisions that we might highlight from these two examples where we see the teachers putting students center stage in the learning process? Love for you to feel free to unmute and just share out that way, or you can add your thoughts to the chat.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the math teacher. It just was nonstop questions. Those kids didn't have a chance. Or what do you mean by that? What's the volume of that? Explain that. And then he just enjoyed the whole class and kept going around with that until there was probably 10 different definitions of volume.
Yeah, and so for him, right, he has this exemplar answer. He's like, I want to know what is volume. And the first kid gave the calculation, which is not the same thing as what is volume. And for him, he was like, yes, I want to acknowledge that, but let's come back to what is volume. And then they were all adding in these different elements that were kind of around the idea of volume. But I love that he was specific. He was attending to precision in their answers. And that is key for ownership, right? If he had said, yeah, sure, that's volume, right? And he could have, one, reinforced some misunderstandings about volume. But two, it just diminishes the student's ability to own the actual real answer. Ooh, Denise says, teacher pushes students to have answers that have depth and understanding. Yes, agree. What else do we notice, either from the math or the ELA example?
Pamela says, allowing students to correct themselves and to clarify. Haley noticed accountable talk among teachers and students. Lori shared that teachers encouraged the students to provide the rest of the answer in detail, and the students supported each other.
Yeah.
And also that the teacher didn't allow that student to quit when the student said, I don't know.
Yeah, kind of that no opting out here, right? I can have some of your fellow classmates add in. And I love, even with that ELA example, that she had the student repeat what he had heard from a classmate so that he owned that answer, right? He said it out loud. He was a part of that. Very good. Any other thoughts about either one of these classrooms? Something that I want to call out, and I love that Denise mentioned, answers that have depth, right? Versus a superficial understanding of a concept or idea, but really pushing and expecting that type of depth is critical for increased levels of student ownership in the classroom. All righty, let's now look at another example. So here we're going to focus on these first two instructional moves, kind of behind the scenes. We're going to watch for how the teacher in this 8th grade social studies example is posing questions and tasks for students to do the majority of the work, right? And then also how the teacher cultivates reasoning and meaning making by allowing students to productively struggle. And I've got a pretty difficult text as well.
Afterwards, we discuss it. Jaden says with astonishment, "So that is the all highest? And everyone, bar nobody, has to stand up stiff in front of him?" Answer the quick right in a sentence of your own words. Just describe what was the narrator's impression of the Kaiser. Give it a go. Pens up and eyes up. And I'm going to call on a few people. I'm not going to react. I just want you to hear what some people thought and check your answer against theirs, and let's see if we can come to a consensus. Ricardo, let's read it.
The narrator thought the president would look more majestic and powerful.
Edelyn?
He feels like
Louder, Edelyn.
he feels like the Kaiser is just like any other person, and he had expected something bigger and more grand.
Melissa?
The narrator's impression of Kaiser was like some regular guy who didn't really look like an emperor or what they imagined that emperor to be.
Raise your hand if you think this matched our prediction of what would happen. Did we? No. You have to be ready for that in a book. Sometimes you're going to think, oh, the German emperor is coming. The soldiers must be very excited about this. They're going to love seeing this guy. He's going to inspire them. But then you have to read what the text says, and you have to be flexible like that. I was really happy to see in people's answers that you picked up on that. Now we need to think of, why is that important? Why would soldiers' opinions of the emperor be significant? What's the relationship between the emperor and the soldiers? Turn and talk to your partner about it. Eyes back on me. Jordan, what were you and Jennifer kicking around? Eyes on your speaker.
So Jennifer and I said that the emperor is supposed to like inspire the soldiers, and if the soldiers don't look at the emperor, in a way like if they're not inspired by the emperor, then like they're not going to be fighting because they're fighting for his cause. So they wouldn't be like super like excited or like inspired to fight for his cause.
What do you think, Jonathan?
Like I agree. So, like
Louder, buddy.
Me and Melissa have said so like if they see that the emperor isn't all that mighty, so like they would lose respect for him, and like they wouldn't really see a cause for fighting the war. So like, yeah.
Marlies?
I agree with Jonathan because like they pictured
Kaiser.
they pictured him as like a powerful person and like a hard work person. And like when they looked at him, they realized that he's kind of just like a normal person like they are. So why would they respect him and follow his rules if they're not really intimidated by him?
Interesting thoughts. Let's continue to see what these guys think about the people in charge of them.
Right, same guiding question. In what ways do the instructional decisions highlighted in the classroom example put students center stage? All right, so again, come off of mute if you don't mind, or throw it in the chat. What are some of your reflections? 8th grade social studies.
Well, I just like that he started off with an excerpt, and then everybody had to be engaged right away. And I like it when they were done, he'd said, I'm not going to react. Let's just go around the room. And I thought that was good because he wasn't saying anything. The students were all saying.
What is it about that, just that simple shift in our instruction? I'm not going to react. How does that change ownership in the classroom? Because that's a really great example to highlight there. What is it about our reactions to student answers that, how might that impact ownership in a lesson?
I think for us, we get nervous as teachers and we go, okay, I got to fill in. There's silence, or, you know, you just, that's what we do. I mean, but I think he's got it down where they kind of are in the mojo of, no, I got to say something. I got to have a voice. And so I think that would be a good transition for me to try to figure out this next year.
Yeah, thank you for sharing so openly. I love, Pamela said, establishes a feeling of safety for students to respond. I think I talked over someone, sorry.
That's okay. I was thinking too, by saying I'm not going to react, he's also not saying the teacher's always right. The students always expect us to provide the perfect answer. And so by not reacting, he's not saying, look at me, I'm going to model the correct answer.
Yeah, and I think that ties to who wrote, Denise maybe wrote, wrote something about here. Students tend to depend on the adult for validation if they're on the right track. And ultimately, yes, right, we're that instructional leader in the classroom. But if we're thinking about our instructional mood, where students are doing the majority of the thinking, teachers cultivating reasoning and meaning making, right? Leaving this space open. And really, if we think about the last instructional move, about creating a condition for conversation and building on each other's thinking, right? Leaving it open to just build over the course of the lesson is such a strong instructional move to facilitate ownership. What else did we notice? John, I think maybe you mentioned the students toward the very beginning of the video, they were all asked to be engaged in that quick write, right? That's a simple shift in our instructional practice there versus just having kids think about it, right? Which that's not necessarily bad, but forcing them to put it on paper kind of ups it a little bit there. Any other noticings?
Well, he just went from that to partner share, and then the partners had to summarize.
Yeah, partner sharing, right? That oral rehearsal is huge, right? Getting a chance just to throw your ideas around with a partner. Did he call on kids with raised hands, or did he do cold call? How did he choose who responded? Did anybody notice that? I saw, I think, kind of a mixture. Some raised hands, some cold call, meaning you just got to be ready because teachers will call on you. And I saw that in the other videos too. So that's a technique as well. And again, I think many of you have noted in your comments, like feeling safe, right? What it takes to, in a classroom environment, expectations, and how that facilitates ownership. That's huge. That culture of learning, that, you know, we're going to build on each other's thinking. We're going to find our way toward that answer. All of that contributes to this type of increased ownership. All right, let's head on to Act 2, all right, of spotlighting effective practice. Here, we're going to dig into a science class. This is actually a reading selection. It's an excerpt or excerpts of a larger essay centered around this particular science classroom and this teacher. So in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to do similar to what you did before with the videos. You're going to jot down your noticings. We're going to use the same guiding questions, same whole group kind of share out. Feel free to stretch while you read. So this is, like I said, 6th grade science teacher, really providing opportunities for students to grapple with challenging content. This is a Boston public school, 90% thereabout high need student population, 98% minority. You're going to hear about the challenge this teacher faces with regard to supporting students who speak a language other than English. yet how she still has these huge expectations for her students to dig into rich, challenging, authentic work. And this school went from one of the lowest performing schools in the whole state to one of the fastest improving. So that's exciting. All with some shifting to their teachers' instructional practice across the building, and really some direction from the leadership as well. We'll talk about that shortly. All right. So I'll let you just kind of pick and choose which of these indicators to look for. They're all there. So you can look for a subset, or you can look for all of them. I'll let you decide. All right. Okay, so Christy is going to drop the link to this excerpt in the chat, or you can use your QR code scanner if you want to look at it on your phone. I read this excerpt to myself a couple times and was interrupted by my 5-year-old at least, twice. And I was able to do it in about 3.5, close to 4 minutes. So I've got us a timer for 4 minutes there. And like I said, just reflect, and we'll come back together and debrief in about 4 minutes. All right. Yep, Christy's got our link in the chat. Can I get a thumbs up? Were people able to access the excerpt? All right, thank you, Linda. All right, here we go, and we'll start the timer.
Well, I think Bethany may be experiencing some technical difficulties. Productive struggle. So the, get to my notes here, just a second. I think the question again that she wanted us to answer is, in what ways do these instructional decisions highlighted in this example put students center stage in the learning?
She's back.
I'm back.
Just
Here
go
I
ahead
am.
go ahead and share your screen again, please.
All right. Well, everybody, the article read. I guess that's the important part. All right, let's see here. Maybe. Appreciate y'all being patient. All right, let's go ahead and just debrief some on the article, or the example, I should say. What were your thoughts about this 6th grade classroom, specifically the instructional moves, but also, especially for my leaders, what leader-driven expectations may be contributing to the learning culture in this classroom?
Good morning, it's Denise. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can. Go ahead, Denise.
This reminds me of my 5th grade math teacher. She never taught math before. And that year, she did a productive struggle with her students as well, because she was learning the new standards herself. And they scored 63% were proficient or advanced on their TN Ready. And I believe it had to do with the teacher learning alongside with the students. And the students saw the value in her own productive struggle, and they were, I don't even think they realized they were doing it through the year. But in the article, it talks about, that the teacher, sometimes she's not sure with the new standards, when to give them the correct answer or if it's correct, and she walks through it with them. So I just think that's a very valuable component.
Yeah, and what a wonderful model, right? That we're all learners. That just speaks to that culture. And I think it's similar. I love what Pamela put in the chat, right? She appreciated the quote, build a deeper understanding of the key concepts of science. It takes longer, or it's messy, it's imperfect, but that's part of the learning process, right? But everyone's a part of just being a scientist and learning it together. It does take time and effort, which I love that this teacher admits to. Any other reflections? This teacher could easily shy away from challenging content, given the needs of her students. She could say, "Oh, I just don't think they can handle it." But I love the fact that she finds ways to scaffold using visuals, different types of partnering techniques, right? The fact that she really focuses on using labs to make learning active and interactive. So again, just a strong example all around. All right, well, with that, down to about our last 6 minutes or so together, we will do a quick closing reflection around this question. Are we perpetuating opportunity? And we'll figure out really what that means here as we move forward. Love this quote, and I know you're adults and you can read it yourself, but I'd love to share it out loud. Any curriculum, program, or model that does not allow students consistent opportunities to engage with grade appropriate assignments, to do the thinking in their lessons, and to engage deeply with what they are learning is effectively perpetuating opportunity. Good intentions aside, if we aren't giving all students those opportunities regularly, we are systematically denying them the chance or opportunity to even try to master the skills they need to reach their goals. And this comes from the report, The Opportunity Myth. It's not a short report, but man, is it worth it. If you just want to take the month of July to read a few pages a day, it will be worth your time. And here are some findings from The Opportunity Myth. And this is actually the report that came out of that multi-year study that I shared at the beginning of our time together. They found that 4 key resources were at the heart of daily, high-quality academic experiences for students. One would be what we all talked about, right, that we all noticed in the chat, consistent opportunities to work on grade-appropriate assignments. Second of all was strong instruction, and man, that could mean a lot of things, but it surfaced out of this study that meant where students were asked to do most of the thinking in the lesson. They were provided that opportunity daily. Also, deep engagement in what they were learning, right? The content was interesting, relevant, and ultimately worthwhile. And then lastly, another key resource was high expectations. That was huge for students, that they could meet those grade level expectations. Now, they found that when students had access to more of these resources, student outcomes were positively impacted. Right? They found that when students, even students that started the year below grade level, closed the outcome gap with their peers by more than 7 months when they had access to grade appropriate assignments. Right? And that may, again, that might seem a little like, what, really? Because I think we tend to over scaffold at the point of denying opportunity or really diminishing ownership when we don't provide even students who we think are going to struggle with that grade appropriate work, actual grade appropriate work. If we bring it down too low and they don't get a chance to grapple with that strong engaging material, all right, we're perpetuating that opportunity. So we want to make sure we're providing grade appropriate assignments. Regarding strong instruction in classrooms serving high proportions of students behind grade level, stronger instructional practices amounted to 6 additional months of learning. So remember, that's instructional practices that really push students to do most of the thinking in the classroom. Love this next finding about engagement. In classrooms in the top quartile for instructional practices, engagement was in turn 31% higher than in classrooms with weak instruction. So we see that connection between good, like real, authentic, engaging opportunities for learning. Even if it's challenging, kids grab hold of it and run, right? And they are more engaged as a whole. And then lastly, with regard to expectations, right? Students who were in classrooms where that strong expectation was evident gained about an additional 5 months of learning. So a lot of impact when these 4 key resources are in play. And I want to kind of do another timeout. I loved it at the end of this report. It talks about how, you know, instructional practices in these schools that were a part of this multi-year study weren't perfect. So even when they were getting this type of data, they were only seeing these practices about half the time at that point. This was still really new to these schools who were involved in this work. And so even when you're only providing these resources about half the time, they were seeing this type of impact already on student outcomes. So just imagine once we got really consistent with providing these 4 key resources. All right, I want to encourage you just to seize the opportunity, right? There are ways that as a leader, whether you're a school, a building principal, an instructional coach, or a teacher leader, that you can cultivate increased levels of student ownership. And there's actually an action guide for leaders in our materials that's tied to this work. All right, in our last minute together, in revisiting the 1 to 3 words you threw in the chat at the beginning of our session about the concept of student ownership, what 1 to 3 additional words might you add now? So I'll just have you put your ideas in the chat, or obviously feel free to unmute and share that way. How is your understanding of student ownership expanded or shifted a little bit as a result of this time together? Yes, Lori says students actively engaged.
Denise says high expectations for students. And we should engage, challenge, inspire, and real learning.
Thanks, Pamela.
Tim, students need to be engaged more, all students.
Productive struggle, Yes, teachers, right? And how we probe and really push for precision in student answers, building on thinking. Yeah, engagement and expecting students to do most of the work. And that's not because, we're lazy or we're mean, right? But the classroom is a space for learning, right? And they've got to be engaged in all those things. They've got to be doing most of the work to have the richest learning possible. All right, well, with that, I know we're out of time. I appreciate you all being patient as I got kicked out and had to come back in. John's going to throw our link into the chat for our evaluation, and Christy's going to share a little bit about that evaluation, and then I will share some resources with you.
Okay, first I'd like to thank you for attending our Virtual Summer Institute session. Please do take our 1-minute survey. This survey allows us to reflect on your thoughts about the session. We're always looking for ways to improve, and it also lets us collect your information if you would like to receive a certificate of attendance for the session. So I think John has dropped that link into the chat. And Bethany, I'll hand it back over to you.
Again, appreciate you bearing with me as I got kicked out, but I did want to share a few resources with you. This is all hyperlinked on the website, so you'll be able to dig into all of these at a time that's convenient for you. And I wanted to specifically highlight the action guides, which are tied to that opportunity myth resource. And then the one that I have highlighted here, Student Experience Toolkit for Increasing Student Ownership. And I'm going to click on that real quickly just so you can see what's so neat about this resource. And there's actually multiple toolkits on the TNTP website. And this toolkit is especially for instructional strategies that push students to own their thinking. And what I love about it are the individual strategies, the teacher actions that are highlighted, and then all of these hyperlinked resources, protocols, videos, articles. Just you name it, it's here. Just so neat. It kind of just goes on and on. So lots of neat things to look at and for you to explore, in all your spare time. Wink, wink. All right, so just wanted to share that with you. And at that, I know you're wrapping up doing your evaluation, and we'll be around to answer any questions you have. And if not, we'll see you hopefully around for another Virtual Summer Institute session, or just have a great rest of your summer and a great, wonderful school year next year, no matter what it looks like. Woo.